This is the Parents in Sport podcast. Amazing guests, honest conversations, topics that matter.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Parents in Sport podcast. I am your host, Gordon MacLelland, and I'm delighted to be joined today by author, people helper, and all-round good guy, Steve Sallis. Steve, thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm very much looking forward to sharing our lenses on the world for the next however long. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, fantastic, Steve. Now, I obviously know who you are, but can you tell our listeners a little bit more about your background in sport?
Failed footballer, as I call myself in every single podcast. So I was at Brighton for 8 years, got released at 19. Was the only footballer of my generation to have any A-levels, to scrape some A-levels. Failed my GCSEs previous to that as well, and then went to uni in London, in Greenwich, did my degree in physical education and was a teacher for 17 years in total. Did an undergrad degree and worked in some of London's finest comprehensive schools, 4 special measures schools, 4 failing schools, and that was what made me totally. I was a vice principal for 9 of those years. Lectured at East London University in PE also. And then that led, when we say teachers' jobs is to change kids' lives, but the true story is an ex-pupil changed my life, and he texted me about the job at Millwall. And had he not texted me, I wouldn't have got the Millwall job. And if I didn't get that, I wouldn't have got the England job. And if I didn't get that, probably no one would have bought my book, so they wouldn't have known who I was. So, yeah, lots of incredible stories. Obviously, now I have a business working with mental health, mindset, leadership, and just genuinely trying to help people have a better life in and out of work, really, mate.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, you obviously mentioned a couple of things in there that are going to be quite prevalent today, because you obviously talked about your time at Millwall in football academies, and that's what we're going to talk about today from a number of different lenses, and trying to tie in all of our shared experience, both as people that like yourself who've been involved in the sort of coaching and management, and myself who's been through the system as a parent. But I want us to start by giving you the chance to tell us a little bit more about your book, because obviously I bought it a few weeks ago, Educating Football, and I've had a chance to sort of dig into it. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about that and what inspired you to write that book, or why you felt there was a need for that?
Yeah, the book came about complete fluke. I was at Millwall in my first month, and all of the academy staff were talking about a guy that had written a book, and they were so like, God, he's written a book, and he's written a book, and they just kept going on about it. And I just finished my master's degree, which was a part-time degree in leadership and educational psychology, and I was so used to writing in the evenings that I was on a bit of detox and thinking, what do I do with myself in the evening? So that was literally, I graduated in January 2014. The Millwall staff had this chat probably middle of January. I went home that night, went to the pub with my friends on the Thursday and said, I'm going to write a book tomorrow. They all sort of pissed themselves laughing and said, no, you're not. And I woke up 6 o'clock that morning, went into the training ground at 7. I wrote my first chapter. And the first chapter was called He Can't Do That. Now, what I mean was, I suppose, in teaching, that repertoire, that language is not really used. And I suppose I couldn't get my head around that every football club handpicks every player, and then they handpick the player, and then they say he can't do things or she can't do things. So that was the real inspiration in the first chapter. And then the book, really, I always say this quite confidently, I don't know any more than people in the football industry, but I think I come from a different lens and fill a lot of gaps that people haven't done. And so the book was just a mishmash of all of my experiences of education, pro football. Educating Football seemed an appropriate title because obviously I've been in education and pro football. I've gone through the system as well, and I suppose I just saw massive gaps in the industry, and people see me as a bit of a martyr, I think, Gordon, but I'm not. I'm just trying to upskill people, educate people, give people different perspectives of how we develop young people, and really come with a more educational angle about how we develop people, because I don't think that football needs to be bashed as much as it is, but at the same time there's still so much bad practice going on in football, which if let's say a lot of people in academy football had gone and done an education degree, I definitely think they would see education and coaching as different things. I mean, let me just apply this quickly before we move on to something else. In school, we call it teaching and learning. So teaching and learning. And in coaching, we just call it coaching. And then there's this big word called learning that's missed out. So, just because you taught it doesn't mean to say they learnt it, is what I say to a lot of coaches. So really, I'm coming at it from an educational point of view of how we can add value in every way on the grass.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that it's certainly a unique environment. As you know, I'm fortunate enough to work across so many different sports and so many different environments and things. And there's no doubting that football academies are unique, I guess, in the environments that they are. But as you say, I think the negative side of that is they've sort of evolved within their own world. And what, as you say, probably there needs to be better practice in as sort of just gradually sort of developed. And as you say, until somebody raises a question or somebody starts to make these shifts, it's very much them just going through the next generation again, isn't it? That's what they found in the environment, and the environment just keeps repeating itself.
Yeah, football's not in a rude way. I say it quite confidently. It's institutionalised by itself because everyone's got the same level of thinking. We spoke off air, didn't we, about kids that come out on day release and then they come out of a day a week of school for 5 years and the kid gets released anyway. So I'm like, how does that happen? And how are kids allowed on day release if they don't conform at school? So I don't see day release as something which should be connected to how intelligent you are. It should be connected to your attitude to learning, your behaviour for learning scores, and how much progress you make. And therefore, you could argue that there's kids that are A-grade kids that are, then drop down into B-grade kids, but no one really notices that because they're still above a C. It's now numbers, not letters, but that's my metaphor is that, yeah, when I went into pro football, I was just like, how is this happening? And why is it allowed? And it's done because it's always been done that way. And I think that we have got to come from a more ethical or moral standpoint. And in fairness, listen, this podcast is about education. We've said that before. And there's some brilliant practice going on out there from so many people and so many clubs. But some of the stuff that is going on is shambolic.
Yeah, both of us will give them a bit of a shout out because we like the guys at Derby County, don't we? And Simon Ord and his team there. I look at some of their practice and some of the work that they're doing, and it gives you a huge amount of confidence in that type of work will probably be happening in a lot of places. But what we also both know is it's in a lot of places that certainly isn't happening, and obviously. I had to tell you my own personal story from last week and the shock of having to pick up the pieces of my son being released without any prior warning whatsoever or any intervention. So I think, as you say, from an ethical point of view, we've got to be better, haven't we? I walked away and just thought we've got to be better than this with young people.
And on that point, all my business model is based around self-awareness. And therefore, yeah, when we spoke a month ago, I remember us talking and I was trying to reflect about what I need to do to try and share my lens on football to your listeners. And we know, what do we know? The facts are we know that kids are going to get released. So parents need to sort of have that in their locker straight away. And I think, please don't think I'm sounding draconian. Your kids need to know that it's very unlikely they're going to be a professional football player. They need to know that really early. Clubs need to do a better job of these honest conversations. I think compared to my experiences in schools, you don't really get letters from academies, do you? You don't really get updates. You don't really get information about how to be a better parent. And I know some clubs are doing that, but generally there's looseness, there's poor practice. And I think in a school, I worked in 4 failing schools into aspiring schools. And the reason I'm strategy obsessed, because without strategy, you've got no hope at how that looks operationally. And I think in football, loads of people know loads about football, but they know sod all about most other things. Leadership, strategy, operation, soft skills, how that looks on the grass, teaching, learning, educational psychology, sports psychology, all of these other skills and concepts that knowing about 11v11 and coaching is just this small little part. And I think clubs are still not doing enough to know, actually, if I'm being blatant about it, what teaching and learning actually is. I mean, you saw my tweet on Friday. There's a club that's released 13 players at 16. A year before, those 13 players have been said that they're good enough. And then a year later, they're not good enough. I'm not saying that you wouldn't release 6, but how can you release that many kids when a year early you've said yes, yes, yes to? In a school, my head teacher would absolutely laugh me out the building if I said in year 7, year 8, year 9 and year 10, yeah, we're on forecast to do well, boss. Well, our GCSE is going to be on force. And then all of the kids fail their GCSEs. He'd look at me like I'm mental. So, telling him lies. So I think, again, we just need to be mindful that our practices need improvement. And I mean, I spoke to a guy called Nick Irwin this morning. He's an old Millwall colleague. He's head of medicine at West Brom, and then he's now working for the Premier League. And he told me, in fairness, some great stories. I think Gareth Pross is his name, former Wolves Academy manager. He's now in charge of Premier League auditing. And the stories coming out of him about him being a really sophisticated leader, a really measured leader, they are great stories that I want to hear, because sometimes myself, as well as you, Gordon, I need realigning about some of the great stuff that's going on in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting just listening to you there that it's this joining up of everything, isn't it? You come at it from your angle, leadership, practice, learning and everything else. And actually, obviously the work we're doing direct to parents, but also in terms of looking at what a really good parent culture looks like in these academies and what that means for coaches as well. Because unless we're aligning the cultures and values of the club through the coach practice and behaviours and their communication, can we then expect some real buy-in from parents and an understanding of what's actually going on here? And I think the one that you say about expectation, I think is really important. And I did joke, when my son signed as a 9-year-old and signed his contract, if I'm told as an adult that the odds of him playing Premier League football for that club are the same as me being hit by a meteor, then surely as an adult, I have to take the correct route with him. How would I possibly gamble his life, his existence, based on those odds? I wouldn't do it with my own house. I wouldn't do it on those odds with my own job. I wouldn't do it with anything that's going. Yet we're prepared to maybe gamble our approach based on those really small chances. And I know when I talk to parents that it is so important that they use the journey to equip the kids with these amazing life and character skills, take the opportunities that are available to them, the amazing facilities, some of the really good coaching that goes on, the opportunities to maybe travel abroad, all those positive bits that come with it. But also making sure at home as parents that their kids are multifaceted kids, that it isn't just the only thing that they've got going on in their lives or the only thing that they're talking about. Because do you know what? Picking up the pieces from that later on down the line, when that's all there's ever been in a life, is going to be so difficult to do. And that's, we both know this is where the mental health and unfortunately some of the really sad stories that have come out of football really start to kick in. But it's not just the clubs as well. The clubs have got a part to play in their safeguarding and the mental health and how they release and how they look after people. But actually the parents can be doing a lot from the very start of the journey, can't they?
Listen, it's multifaceted. You've got a business called Parents in Sport, but let's look at my sport in terms of football, because I'm not that familiar with youth sport in other areas. I think that parents in football are, some of them are worrying. So if you're not going to be aware that the reality is that your kid probably won't be a professional footballer, the reality is people think I'm mad about behaviour. If you're a difficult human being, it's very likely you'll have a 500 game career. It's very unlikely. You might get in, but you won't stay there. As you say, no dickheads policy with the All Blacks. You don't get now. The modern game is so challenging. Now, I'm not saying don't take difficult kids, but a lot of the clubs haven't got mentors to help the difficult kids. So in my book, I've got a chapter called Reggies, players that are rounded. then some players have got an edge. And I think the rounded players need a performance edge, in my experience. And I think the players with an edge need to become more rounded to make it really simple for the parents out there. So I think what I'd say is that it's just trying to create like more accountability for the clubs. So the clubs need to be better at being honest. The clubs have the knowledge. That's what weirds me out a little bit, Gordon. The clubs have the knowledge about the data, but they don't share the data with the parents. Like, have the signing on night. Great, have all that. A week later, why don't they just send a letter out saying, thank you for signing on, we hope you had a really good time. Just to remind you, like black and white, there it is. Your kid has 0.1.4% chance of being a professional footballer, but we will do everything we can to develop them as a person and as a player. Let's enjoy this journey together. Finally, I mean, this is what I would write as a vice principal. It is very likely that your son will be released in the next 6 years. We will do everything we can to prevent that, but please make sure that you're clean on that. I've never seen a club write that ever.
No, I haven't, and you're absolutely right. And I think that whole idea of enjoying the journey for what it is, taking the best bits from it. Well, actually, because what we're saying in effect is that actually there's probably really likely that you're going to go and end up in some other facet of life with your work or whatever you choose to go and do next. So actually, I think the most popular question I get asked by parents, Steve, actually is, Gordon, how do I know it's all been worth it? And my response at the moment has been, this is where I am, Steve, and I'm on about take 155 with this, by the way. But I say to a parent now, if you have used sport, which still remains today one of the safest vehicles to equip your children with a wide range of character and life skills that will allow them to thrive in whatever environment they end up in, it will have been worth every single ounce of money, passion, energy, everything that you've thrown at it. And actually, when I talk to parents, I also think that if you view the experience through that lens, so that if they're watching the kid and they're thinking, okay, right, I've seen some determination today, I've seen some resilience, I've seen them communicate well with the mates, I've seen a bit of creativity, I've seen a bit of adaptability, they got themselves organised this morning, they did that. All those things that are really important. If we're seeing lots of those in young people anyway, there's a good chance they're going to be performing well. But I think we can celebrate with our children an awful lot more then if we're looking at it through that lens than, well, were we the best player, or did we win, or did we score, which seems to be the common narrative.
I mean, in my book, I talk about prove or improve. Like, we can use football as a metaphor. There's a lot of proving that goes on in society, so we can't hide that from kids. Like, welcome to the real world of succeeding, not succeeding. Welcome to the real world of, I call it, in my business model, I call it strategic stress and strategic safety. Don't make up stressing kids out on the training ground, and don't make up making them feel safe. Be mindful when you're a coach or a parent. How can I make my kid's life more difficult if it's nice? And how can I make my kid's life safer if it's not so nice? And being mindful about that. Football's got this word holistic banded about. I mean, there's probably 25 to 30% of clubs that are truly holistic. If they were truly holistic, they wouldn't be letting difficult kids out of school on day release. That wouldn't be happening. And again, my lens on it is a lot of football people traditionally haven't been natural. And this is not me generalising. Football's changing. There's so many more academic people. But a lot of football coaches or ex-pros haven't had a good experience of education. Therefore, they don't feel the importance of an education and how that can connect to the well-being and growth and maturity and performances on the pitch. So I think we've got lots of lenses, but a lot of lenses, Gordon, they're not accurate lenses. That's the problem. They don't know about child development. So we've got people in charge of football clubs that know loads about football, but they don't know about child development. So that's why it upsets me, because they don't. But aligned with that, I'm waffling here a bit, but they don't know about strategy. And what I mean by strategy is sending letters home to parents, educating them to upskill the parents to know more than they did the day before.
Yeah. Look, there's definitely that side, isn't it? And where, hence working with parents in sport came about, Steve, and it's working everywhere, because actually we've got to provide the support and the information to the parents to upskill them, because it is a really tough gig. You know, and I find it massively difficult. I live and breathe this every day, but oh my God, I make some mistakes. And as I said to you earlier, okay, I've spoken to lots of parents about how you plan for bad news and the release. Well, I've had to live it for the last week, and I felt sick for the last week, and I feel really bad about the world. Fortunately for me, as I said to you off air before we started, my kid seems to have far more resilience than I have, and is bounced back unbelievably quickly, which is credit to him. But I know me and his mum are finding life, you know, far more difficult, and we've done what we can to upskill ourselves. But oh my goodness, what a tough challenge. There's no manual for it, and yet there must be people who just feel totally alone and totally isolated.
And let's apply this holistic word to something edible for the listeners. Player identity, right? I put that tweet out on Friday. I won't tell what the listeners is. It won't be hard to work out what it is. So lots of likes and retweets, as you know. And one of the persons that have liked it, which I'm grateful for the like, has got a Twitter account, a parent, which says, I'm a proud father of a championship club, won't name the club, under 14 goalkeeper. Now, that kid, like, he plays football for a club, but he's, you know, let's say his name's James. He's not James the footballer, is he? He's a kid called James that happens to play football. But then his dad is promoting that on Twitter. Like, what are you doing, mate? Like, that does not help a child. Like, stay under the radar. Just let it be what it is. And therefore, my point is, my dad's a plumber, Gordon. If I've got an issue with my plumbing, I go and hire an expert to sort my plumbing out. So we can blame the parents all we want, but my point is, the job of a football club is to educate the parents, but they don't. So therefore, we need to keep banging the door down and saying, what are you doing strategically? Because without strategy, it is doomed. You can't, like football clubs, not in a rude way, they know loads about football, know very little about strategy, which means a lot of them are just working off the cuff. They're just working on a little bit of emotion on one day, or, yeah, we'll do that another day. There should be timelines. There should be strategic changes. There should be KPIs. And we know that clubs now are accountable for that. So the EPPP has enabled football to be much more strategic. But again, this is the problem with poor strategy. They're strategic, but they're still missing massive things in the actual element of development. So in school development, we call it triangulation. The kid, the parent, the school.
Yeah.
So how can we triangulate and align what we're trying to do with your child? And we know that in football, there's massive misalignment there.
Yeah, and yet coaches will tell you, coaches I've worked with in football academies will tell you that they find parents really annoying when they deliver conflicting messages to that of what they're delivering. And then when you say to the coaches, what information have you provided for the parents to continue those conversations at home? And they look at me and go, oh, well, I didn't know. I said, well, have you got them round after a session and said, we've been working on this and this is what it looked like? I'll tell you a funny story, actually, Steve. About a year ago, I was watching this session. I'll never forget this. It was cold and it was wet and it was a miserable night. And I was watching my kid, because we all watch our own children specifically, because that's what you do. So I was watching class. He was making loads of mistakes and I was getting that feeling a little bit hot under the collar, a little bit uncomfortable, stood watching thinking, oh my goodness me, what on earth are we doing here tonight, sort of thing. And I was sort of keeping myself to myself. And then I looked and I thought, hang on a minute, I haven't really seen this before. Oh, they're trying something new. And you could see him sort of trying to work it out and he hadn't quite done it. So the learning bit of finding it difficult and I'm thinking, oh, this is all right. This is something completely different. Never seen this before. Doesn't matter. There are hundreds of mistakes. It's fine. And then I started watching all the other players, because you forget to do that sometimes. You watch your own kid, but you don't really watch other people's. And they were making loads of mistakes. So it's like, oh, this is all right then. Thank goodness for that. The world's all right and whatever. And then I put the teaching hat back on and thought, no, they're just learning. This is part of the learning process. I walked down to the end where everybody else had been watching, because I always stand on my own. And I said to everyone, good session that tonight, wasn't it? It sort of turned around by the end. Good session that tonight, wasn't it? I was greeted by about 6 parents who goes, No, it was bloody awful, wasn't it? It was absolute rubbish. And it was like, well, why was it rubbish? Well, did you see how bad it was? And I said, yeah, and how many times have the kid tried that before? And they had no understanding that children learn by being put in those situations and making mistakes and failing and being disappointed. And they just assumed that because there'd been mistakes, that it was the worst session that had ever been put together by a coach. And then you really start to realise, without the fortunate background that someone like me and you have got, it's just impossible for them. It's just an absolute maze of trying to manage emotions, what they should be seeing. And we've got to, as you say, and we keep going back to it, we've got to find ways of getting them more upskilled and understanding what they're actually seeing.
Yeah, I mean, brilliant point. In my final school in South East London, we identified massive gaps in terms of the parents' understanding of what we were trying to do as a school, right? So our exclusion rate went up, parents are complaining. Our results were going up, but parents didn't really care. They just cared about their own child. So we had like better behaviour, better results, but then the parents were complaining that our exclusions went up. And so anyway, my point being is that from a teaching and learning angle, that was a behaviour angle, but from a teaching and learning angle, we had to create a process where we were upskilling the parents to become better learners themselves in order to help their child become a better learner. So obviously you've heard me say this language before about learning to learn. Instead of talking about football, it's how we learn about football. Instead of talking about science, maths and English, it's how we learn about science, maths and English. And bringing the learning process back a complete step to upskill the children with a toolbox to be able to learn, ask good questions, be a good listener. What are good questions? Just trying to upskill children on what learning is, but using that toolbox for the parents. And probably it was one of the most powerful movements where first week, I think we had 11% take up, parents coming in. So we would do it once a month in the lecture theatre in the school. Week 2 in a year group, I think we had, it was month 2, so monthly we had at 23%, so we doubled it. Then it plateaued about 35%. Within about 18 months, we had 65% of parents coming from monthly sessions on how they can help their children learn. So that's what I mean. You can talk the talk, but you have got to walk the walk. And when a football club's ever thinking like that, to upskill the parents, to give the parents a better toolbox, to triangulate the process of learning experiences to add value to their child's development. To me, it's common sense.
It would appear to be, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. One thing that does interest me, because sometimes to sort of touch a nerve, I guess, within football or within football academies, to ask this question as well. I wonder how many players we've lost over the years, Steve, due to the way that their parents supported them at home. Not the bit what the football club did, but necessarily as well. I wonder what the flip side is of not having those skills and not being able to support in a beneficial way. It'd be very interesting to see how many players were almost wrecked before they'd even had the chance because of the overbearing parent, the football being the be-all and end-all at a young age. No fun, it has to be this, it has to be that. I mean, we'll never know the answer. It's just something that sort of cropped through my mind that actually, hang on, if we were all trying our very best to do some amazing stuff with our kids, how many more people might we unearth out there?
I just think like the words, if you look at the definition of the word academy, I asked this in a lot of conferences, it's something along the lines of definition is an educational establishment in terms of it being in a special field or environment. So football academy means that it's a place of learning. But I think people just forget that. Like, there's a lot of doing that goes on, but what about the learning aspect? What about creating a truly authentic culture of learning? And I suppose that we've got, I've got 2 degrees in education. It'd be a bit weird if I didn't upskill people with the knowledge that I've got to make them better. Even if you sidetrack to Steve Peters, who wrote the Chimp Paradox book, he wrote an incredible book which every parent and every kid, on my mindset project, if you've seen on socials, called My Future Self. And the book, which I share with every single teenager that I've ever worked with, says 3 things. Life is not fair. the goalposts move and there are no guarantees. Now, football's not fair. The goalposts move in football and there's no guarantees in football. So just upskilling parents with knowledge to make them more rational, because what we've got in sport is irrationality. We've got parents that love their kids so much they cannot act rationally about the rejection. They cannot act rationally about a lot of things that go on Monday to Sunday. And therefore, us as educators, because that's what I am, his job is to give the knowledge to these people, so therefore they behave better. Yeah. But again, to say it, football doesn't do that. If there's a club out there that contacts you and says they are, I would love for them to knock down my door and say, look, Steve, this is what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, as I say, do you know what? And it's exciting. I mean, look, you know, and as I say, I mentioned our work with Derby. You know, we're working on a whole curriculum right through for parents, right from the start, from that start of the academy journey, where we drop in specific workshops, a whole program that will go through from 9 to 18 with regular drop-ins, some live workshops, some virtual stuff. We haven't got all the answers by any stretch, but we're trying to look at the pressure points. We're trying to look at it from a parent angle, trying to look at it from a club perspective. And it's just really, really exciting, as you say, because it's like a blank canvas just for us to add our sort of knowledge into it and try and make this just a far better journey for everybody, you know, involved with it, including coaches who find parents difficult at the best of times. You know, our coach ed work, you know, in some sports is being used as major parts of CPD on how coaches engage with parents, because it's going back to those soft skills that not everybody has. You and I know that coaches would much rather be doing the tech-tac stuff because that's what's appealing. But actually, there's an awful lot of other skills that are needed to be a top coach and a top educator.
And that's fair. That's fair feedback, to be fair, I think. But you've answered the question. The club, Derby County, has got a strategy. So they've had to think about it, and then they've gone, not only are we going to think about it, we're actually going to do it.
Yeah.
So that's the type of thinking it's mean. Everyone's talking about it, but you've got to actually do this stuff and apply it. And I would probably go along the lines of as well, like where I'll give coaches some credit, like you go and get your A license, you go and get your youth award, and then, like you say, probably 20 minutes chat on how to deal with parents. And I think in education just gets spoiled by that. A lot of the clubs, I will say this, they want to do well. Sometimes they don't know how to do well. Some clubs zoom out, so I call it zooming in and zooming out in my book. So, you know, Derby County again have zoomed out and gone, right, an expert hires an expert. We're going to go and get Gordon to help us with our development. He's an expert in that field. Clubs should be doing that more. If you don't know something, you go and find someone that does. But again, that's strategy. So when I batter football for not having a strategy, I don't say it off the cuff, half-witted. I say it because there genuinely isn't a lot of strategy, and without that you are doomed, because player development is a little bit off the cuff and made up, and we need to make sure that it's, you know, I call it black, white and grey in my business model. There's a lot of black and white in life, but development of young people is grey every day. You know, I don't know what great teaching looks like. I just know what bad teaching looks like. I'm not here saying I know exactly all the answers. What I think it is, we just need a bigger toolbox. And as we know, the more tools give you more choice. They don't give us answers, sometimes give us questions. And when you've got rational thinking and you've got upskilled parents, you know, if you gave the parents the Chimp Paradox book to read and they came and kicked off 6 months' time, 2 years' time, you could say to them, excuse me, Mr. Jones, have you read the Chimp Paradox book? And they probably won't have read it, but my point is, as a school leader, having had so many difficult conversations with parents for 20 years, I say it probably quite naturally, but then they're in a position to go, no, I haven't read it, Mr. Sallis. Okay, we haven't read it, but you need to read it because that's why we've sent it to you. And at the moment, Mr. Jones, you're acting really irrationally. So I'm going to talk to you tomorrow when you stop shouting in my face, and then we'll have a chat about it. So you've got to have a little bit about you as a person to back yourself with parents. But my point is, to back yourself, you've got to give them knowledge to make them better at their job.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You brought the Chimp Paradox up loads. We use it in our workshops with with parents about recognising the signs of the chimp and the behaviours that we can associate. And I joke about how we end up most often doing it with our partners, don't we, where we should leave stuff alone and we can't resist the urge to keep going and throw in another thing, and it's totally irrational and it's mad. And every parent can relate to when we've been like that, because we've all done that as humans. It's got nothing to do with football. It's something that we all do when we get on our high horse about something and it finally calms down and we think, oh my goodness, what was I possibly thinking? But you see, the flip side of that, Steve, is you also need to talk to parents. So as part of the parents' workshops, we're talking about, please don't send that late night email after a few beers. Please don't send that late night text. Please wait till the following morning when you've actually read it through. And if you're happy with it, send it. If you're not happy with it, please don't hit the go button, because there's so many times when we get so worked up. I mean, even in the last week, Steve, the amount of times I was tempted to put something on the Working with Parents in Sports site, to put something on the Twitter feed, to fire off an email just because I was gutted for my kid. And I've resisted the urge to do that. And actually, I'm all right. But do you know what I mean? It's so tempting to do that. And actually, you don't get anything productive from behaving like that. And as you say, it's that irrational side which doesn't lead to productive conversations or indeed solutions.
And I don't think it ever will. I mean, I've been lively when I was a kid, and I was lively in my 20s. I've had to learn emotional control. Like, you just do. That was just school. You just learn from your colleagues. You learn you learn all of the errors that you make. And again, I think that is linking to self-awareness, because you need to be self-aware that you may have a temper problem or an anger problem or irrational thoughts problem, and understanding the human brain. Again, there are clubs out there that are doing it. And I know that it's difficult, isn't it? Because we label football Category 1 clubs and Category 2 clubs and Category 3 and 4. There's some clubs out there that just haven't got the resources, they haven't got the people, they haven't got the money. So that's why we've got to be delicate about, naming and shaming football. It's not football. There are some great people in football. There always have been, actually. But as I said, my colleague in the Premier League this morning, there is still not enough people who are strategic thinkers, that are ethically and morally sound. There are not the people with the skills. And in fairness, we need to bring this up, Gordon. I wasn't going to bring this up today, but the salaries in football, not in a rude way, you pay for what you get. And, I think of my uni crew that are all, inner London secondary teachers, most of them head teachers now. They've all got their coaching badges. But why are they going to leave a 60 to 70 grand a year teaching wage as a senior leader to go to work for 30 grand as an academy coach? Yeah. So if the clubs aren't willing to pay better wages, I'm not saying that if you're on 30 grand, you're not good. I'm not saying that. But again, what I'm trying to say is I know a better quality of potential coach that could be around, the children of the future, but they're not around because the wages don't allow them to do that. Yeah. So again, that's a question I answer, because I know that there's some brilliant coaches on 30k a year and less that are game changers. But at the same time, if the clubs are not willing to invest in it, then you're not going to keep people in the game. That's what I mean. The good people go and do something else, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked, say, a couple of years ago, and the more I sort of dug into this world and was looking at things, and as you say, I saw one of those academy coach jobs come up, and it was for the highest qualified coaching badge, and I was looking through it, and they were trying to offer 24 grand. Yeah. And it's like, oh my goodness, I don't get this. You work hard like you do in your field, don't you, to get to your top of your field. I've been a director of sport in schools for 15 years, and that's coming to an end soon. But you've done all that, and you've worked to the top position, and you've done it, and you get paid accordingly. And it's way more than that. And I'm thinking, God, these coaches who've got to the top of their profession or the top level of qualification, and they're getting paid peanuts. And it's like, oh my goodness, I'm surprised they're still involved in the game and they're not doing something else. And amazing. Yeah, I agree with you. And look, that good people cost money, don't they? Good people do, but it's worth the investment for what you get at the other end, just like they pay the footballers for the end product that they get off them. It's the same principle, but it never quite moves into, as you say, the educational side as much as the delivery on the field.
But again, club strategy is flawed. You've got these players that are on inflated wages, ridiculous wages, not the Premier League lads necessarily, because I just think therefore they're on all this money, but then the academy coaches don't get anything like it. They're doing all the hours. Where's the moral and ethical leadership there? Like, pay your staff, and if you paid them well, you might get a better return on your investment. You might get longevity with less turnover and more retention. You might get lots of things by treating people correctly, and I think that was really another reason why I chose to leave pro football, was because I felt, what did I feel? I felt that my time had come, and I'm back in it now, aren't I, at Wimbledon, but I felt my time had come, but it was also about, I'm living in a flat in London, Gordon, and I don't want to live in a flat in London when I'm 50. I want to try and aspire to having a house with a garden, and therefore, if you're a 24-year-old person, 25-year-old person, and you're on 25 grand a year as an academy coach, and you know that you're not going to earn any more money, and you need to get on the housing ladder, let's think of the younger people, not just myself. That's what I mean. It's a very, very difficult career to try and have a life which people deserve, don't they?
Yeah.
It's not easy for young coaches to get on the ladder on those wages. Very, very difficult.
Yeah, really hard. I mean, it's hard for young coaches as well, isn't it? Just per se, isn't it? As you say, low wages, long hours. Society's changed a bit. We served our time and purposes. I think the hours I put in one year where I was doing 2 coaching jobs, and it was literally every hour that God sent. Luckily, the long-term return on that's hopefully been a good career with a well-paid job. But that's because it led from that, and you learned from it and moved on. As you say, if you just stay with one thing, it's you're not going to get what you deserve, really, are you? If that's what it looks like in terms of money.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this again, it's 2 sides of the coin. Academy, there's an obsession with wanting to be a football manager, isn't there? Like, there's absolute obsession. So many people getting qualified for so little jobs, and then 70% of managers that lose their job at professional football first team level, they don't get another job in pro football. So I suppose that another part of my strategy is to swerve that, because I could be a manager, I just don't want to be. But why would I be a manager to then do 15 to 20 years to then get there and get sacked anyway? So that's not the odds aren't in my favour. So when young people email me all the time, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and say, what do I advise? Honestly, I say every time, go and be a teacher. Go and upskill yourself, with those skills that we've done for all those years, because you cannot replicate a day at school to anything else that I've ever done. The conversations that you have, the parents, kids, we haven't talked about the teaching element yet, but, you actually have to teach kids to make them better at stuff. That's the hardest bit. But then there's all the other stuff that I suppose we just take for granted, with the ability to be organised, the ability to communicate as best we can, the ability to be calm, the ability to be kind, the ability to be empathetic, the ability to know your subject, the ability to lead people, the ability to influence parents, the ability to listen well. All of these things as a teacher, I suppose we just take for granted. But when I say now, with my career and how crazy it's gone, without teaching, there is no way I would be here now sharing this story with you. No way.
Yeah, and I'll sort of agree with you wholeheartedly on that. There's no way that without teaching and education, I'd be in the position that I am today, and fortunate enough to work with the sports that I do and be able to communicate like we are now, and to the coaches and to parents and everybody without going through that experience. So I agree with you, and I think there's so much that people who've gone through education can actually offer sport per se across a number of different strands, just because it does bring in so many of those different skills that you talk about. It's a really good one for putting a toolbox together.
And I need to share this because this is a parents' podcast for them. My mum used to say to me, Gordon, son, you love football too much. You love football too much. And my mum, who's a legend, retired primary school teacher, And she was right 99.9% of the time. But you know what? On that one occasion, Gordon, she was wrong, because football now pays my bills. So what's the advice to parents is get your kid to smash school. And when I mean smash school, to the best of their ability, let them max out. Education doesn't make you happy. What education does is give you a choice, more tools, more choice. So I think that without the education that I then did my retakes, etc., obviously doors open within education, and we need to make sure that when we're talking about holistic development and player identity, we need to be having these conversations with children, getting them to find their own answers, not us always finding the answers for them, because they see the world differently to how we see the world. I need to give you a little caveat here, that the phone that a 10-year-old has right now, an iPhone, it's the worst technology a kid is ever going to have in their lifetime. So, how scary is that? So often parents are blaming young people for having their phone out, but people are forgetting it's not the kid's fault they've got the phone out. Right? We weren't brought up with phones. They've been brought up with phones. So it's not their fault. It's not a child's fault that we've been brought up with phones. That's just society. So what we need to do is use our wisdom, to educate people. And what wisdom does. Wisdom doesn't always have answers. Wisdom has questions. So we need to coach children and mentor children to be able to make their own decisions and create their own ownership strategies. And then when there's a little bit of a blip, support them and enable them to grow and go where they want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely golden advice there as we sort of draw to the end of this podcast. I guess the last thing for us to talk about, Steve, and I think this is a nice way to round this off, is that if you had one or two things out of all of it that you would like to share with our parents, who are generally the listeners to this podcast, if you were sharing anything with them about the whole football academy system, the whole journey, what would be your best bit of advice that you can possibly give them based on everything that you've learned and everything you've seen?
Do you know what? I've learned this from someone else recently. Justin Cochran, who I'm working with at Wimbledon, he's the England under-17 coach. And we've been in a relegation battle. And every month I ask every player and staff member a word that I want them to relate to what's the most important word that we're going to need to get out of relegation fight. And Justin always uses the same word, and it's perspective. So I think if we can just have perspective on everything, perspective on the academy and how exciting it can be and all of the good, but perspective also on the bad. Perspective on clubs aren't perfect. Perspective on if they're not perfect, can we have an honest, calm and respectful conversation to say to the football club, can you please explain to me your rationale of doing what you're doing? Because clubs don't always see the lens of the parent. And just having respectful conversations to make sure there's better alignment between the kid, the club and the parent. And that's all we need is alignment. I think clubs, for example, saying to a parent, your son isn't good enough, that's not a nice thing to hear, but it's the truth. Now, if we link that into Carol Dweck, you're not good enough yet, you can still get there, but it goes back to the start of the journey. The facts are your child will probably not be good enough to play pro football. So therefore, if you become good enough, just see that whole process as a bonus.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Some very wise words there for our listeners. Steve Sallis, it's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to have you on the podcast. I'm sure you and I could sit and chat for hours, which we certainly won't let our listeners join in on, but it's been an absolute joy. So thanks, Steve.
Thank you so much, Gordon. Keep up the great work with what you're doing, mate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Check us out at parentsinsport.co.uk.